Okay, everyone. So let's talk about the costs and the cost drivers that involve in the production of different products and services. So far in the managerial economics course, if you remember, we have studied that what are the different aspects of demand, what are the factors that actually influence demand, and also the supply of different goods and services in the market. And then we saw the equilibrium, how the shift in equilibrium can be seen, and how different demand factors and supply factors can impact that equilibrium. Eventually, if there is some kind of disturbance, there can be some consumer surplus or producer surplus, as well as there can be a shortage in the market. And after that, we saw that what is elasticity, what is the concept of elasticity, and how we actually understand the change in quantity supplied or quantity demanded when a particular change is seen in the price of the products. So there are some products that are very elastic. That means when the price changes a little bit, you can see the quantity supplied and quantity demanded can be impacted upon quite significantly as compared to other products that are not so elastic. So if we talk about elastic products, of course, petroleum, cars, and all the luxury products can be some examples that you can put in. Also, when we talk about inelastic products, we can talk about the basic needs of everyday, like flour, like milk, eggs, honey, these kind of things. Also, not only the consumables, but life-saving drugs are there. So all those things can be justified as examples of inelastic products. Now, it's very rare to find something very perfectly elastic or perfectly inelastic, but at the same time, the organization needs to know that whatever production is happening, either related to products, tangible goods, or services, how the price change can be impacted upon the revenue. So at the end of the day, whatever we produce, we have to sell it on a certain price. And we sell that quantity in the market. So the quantity that we sell multiplied by the price is the total revenue that we earn. So in order to calculate the revenue, we can say that the price multiplied by the quantity. Now, quantity is can be impacted by the price, since we know that the products can be elastic or relatively inelastic. So when you are in an organization, you need to understand what product or service you are providing. For example, when we talk about telecommunication services, there are a lot of services that are there. For example, you can have calls, you can have SMS services, you can have social media packages, you can have internet packages. So each product, each service has its own criteria, especially when we talk about the market segment which is being targeted, what is their income level, how they actually look at the package which is being delivered to them. And if we change the price, what would be the impact of customers actually not buying the product that you're selling, or maybe shifting to your competitors. So that needs to be understood. But in order to understand that, you need to know that what price you need to put on that particular package that you're providing to your customers, the value package that you're interested to deliver. Now, how we put a price on this? For that, we need to know what our costs are. What were the inputs that were involved in the production? And once we know about those inputs, we can actually work out the cost related to these inputs and eventually add them up. So we can come to a number which then, with the margin of profit, can be introduced as a price in the market. So this section has two parts that I will explain. Number one, we will talk about the inputs of production, and that how we can come to a production function that explains what would be the overall costs of the production. And eventually we will look at the individual costs and their behavior, which is a cost behavior theory in economics. And we will like to see that how fixed cost or variable cost or marginal costs, they change over time, and how their average function, for example, what is the impact of a change in average total cost on the revenue. So these would be some questions that would be looking into it. So number one, the process by which a firm converts input into outputs would be considered. Number two, we will see an analysis of the cost measures associated with the production process. Okay, so with that, I will move forward. So if you see the principle that we are going to explain here is related to any production process. Or for example, if a company is producing tangible goods or the company is producing services, that doesn't matter. We are only simplifying it so we can present a model that can be easily understood and that could be applied to any other process. So you can apply the same analysis to any other process that you're interested in. So in general, any production process works pretty much the same way. Inputs are combined in some way to produce some kind of output. For instance, when you study for an exam, you take your inputs, energy, knowledge, and time, and combine these inputs to produce output, which is the answers that you are going to produce in your examination. Now, in the same way, if there is a farmer who is trying to produce some tomatoes, right? So the farmer would need the production inputs, the production factors. Okay, they are sometimes called the factors of production. Like the farmer would need land, tractor, fertilizers, water, and the labor. He could be putting his own labor, or maybe he's hiring people to come and work for him. And then combine all these inputs to produce output in the form of those tomatoes, which would take some time. And again, to harvest it, and the labor would be required to be there. Now, if we talk about this process, we can see that there is a particular input, and input has a lot of factors in it. And then there is a process which is applied to the inputs, and they are converted into output. Now, when the product is produced, the product is not only produced to see that what could be the output, but eventually you have to sell it out. You have to bring it to the market. So there is a farmer's market where you can go and sell these tomatoes. So in order to produce these tomatoes, farmers have to use diverse combinations of input. For example, what kind of input would be needed, and what could be the variations that can be produced with the varying inputs that you use. When you go to the farmer's market and you want to purchase tomatoes, now you would like to purchase the product which is of the higher quality. And for that higher quality, the combination of the input needs to be in certain form. Because if you change something in the input, eventually it has an impact on the output, right? So a farmer actually needs transportation, like pickup truck on which he is going to load the tomatoes and petrol, gasoline to drive that truck to the market. But the production process starts very well before. After all, the farmer also needs to grow the tomatoes. The actual production of tomatoes, or what the farmers needs to grow and cultivate tomatoes, requires land, water, tractor, fertilizer, and of course workers. So all of these things have to be considered as input. So that we saw. First, you gather the inputs, you utilize them, you go through the process of that, um, you know, sowing the seeds and then eventually watering them. Then at the right time, you provide them fertilizers, and then you come up with the product and you take the product to the market. So this is all example of the factors of production, how they are involved. Now, an input whose quantity is fixed for a period of time and cannot be varied. What other inputs could be considered fixed in the production of tomatoes? Now, we are talking about the fixed inputs and the variable inputs. What is fixed and what is the variable? So here I would like to introduce one idea which is very important to economics, that every business has a short run and a long run. By short run, we mean the time period in which your capital assets cannot be expanded. Let me give you an example. For example, there is a particular telecommunication service company that has an infrastructure installed in a hilly area. And since there are two towns in that hilly area, the company only have access to one of the towns. So in the short run, it is not possible for the company to actually acquire customers from the second town. The reason for that, because the company does not have any infrastructure over there, and it is not possible to create that infrastructure and place it into that particular town within fortnight, within a few days. It would take a lot of time. So the short run is a time period in which the fixed input cannot be changed, cannot be expanded, but in the longer run it can be expanded. So here we can say that in the longer run every input is variable, but in the shorter run there are certain inputs that are fixed and we have to go with them as they are. We cannot change them, we cannot come up with different solutions for them, so we are quite limited with the fixed inputs, right? On the other hand, there would be some variable inputs that we can change. For example, we cannot change land for a farmer in the short run, because the land is something which has the highest capital invested in, and that cannot be changed in the short run. But we can change the number of seeds that we sow in the soil. We can change the water or the fertilizer, right? So there are certain things that can be changed. So we always see that what is the fixed input and what is the variable input that is involved in production. So now land after land, a barn where the farmer keep all the output can be a fixed, you know, uh, this is a storage area, so it is also not possible for the farmer to actually create another storage area in the short run. Now when we talk about short run and long run, there is another distinction that you need to know, and that is it really changes from business to business. For some businesses the short run can be a couple of days or a week. After 1 week they can change their fixed inputs by getting a loan or maybe by investing more capital into business. But there could be other businesses that would require to expand their fixed inputs for like months. So the time period is not fixed for every business. You cannot say that 1 month for every business is a short run. It always depends from business to business, from product and services to services, that in how many days you can actually have an alteration in that fixed input department. Okay, so now other inputs could be changed rather quickly. For instance, consider the workers a farmer use in the field. While you're harvesting the tomatoes, how quickly can you harvest? That depends how many laborers you use. And that can be changed. You can hire many people to get involved in it, and eventually the things would be easier because specialization of work is involved in there, right? So if one day our farmer decides to stop growing tomatoes, the farmer could technically tell all of the tomato workers on the farm that they don't have to come to the work anymore. So you can change that. You can always change your variable input. You can tell the uh, laborers to not to come to the farm, or you can hire more laborers if you want, if the necessity comes to that. Obviously, this would be a very mean thing to do. But the point is that the farmer could easily change the number of workers used, regardless the period. So we call this type of input a variable input because you can change it. You have some kind of control over it. So we have two types of input so far. We have the fixed inputs and the variable inputs. So when we talk about tomato, we can talk about laborers, we can talk about fertilizers, we can talk about water. All these are variable inputs. But the land and the barns, they can be the fixed. Also the tractor, if there is a tractor involved in it, that can be one fixed input, and it would take a lot of money and a lot of time for a farmer, a small farmer, to get another one. Okay, so what is the bottom line here? The bottom line is a fixed input is an input whose quantity is fixed for a time period. So in the short run you cannot change it, that cannot be varied in the shorter run. But after that time period you can go into expansion and that can be changed. As well as there is a variable input, and the variable input is an input that can be changed at any point of time. You can add extra units of it, and you can deduct units of it from the process of production if you want. Okay, so now we see that uh, what will happen in the market. Before that we will see that what is the production function, how we explain the production function, that how many inputs are there. And now basically production function is the relationship between the quantity of the output and the input. For example, how much input you add and how much output you will get. Now why this is important? Because the marginal analysis that we do. What is the marginal analysis? I really need to know that if I added one extra laborer in harvesting process, what will be the time I'll be saving by adding that extra labor. So by adding 1 unit of input, how much effect I will see in the output, that is something I'm very much interested in, and that is something that I really want to know. Now here's an example. Look at this table. There are people that I get involved in the harvesting process, laborer, and with each additional laborer, how many pounds of tomatoes per day are being increased. For example, if I don't have any labor, nobody's working in the field, so I don't have any output. But if I bring in one person, I can have 55 pounds of tomatoes harvested out of the farm that I have. Now, if I bring another one, so the production goes to 95 pounds. If I add the third one, the production goes to 125. If I add the fourth one, the production goes to 145. With the fifth one, it increases to 155. And with the sixth one, it goes to 160. Now, you have to look carefully, what is the marginal product of labor? When we talk about the marginal product of labor, we are talking about that how much change was there in the input and how much change was there in the output. So if I add one extra unit into the input, how much change can I see in the output is what we call the marginal product of the labor. So there is a formula that marginal product of labor is equal to change in quantity of output divided by the change in the quantity of input. And here, since the quantity of input is the labor, so we will see that in the denominator, we can keep the number of laborers. So this is how I can calculate the marginal production. When I have 0 individuals working in the field, the output is 0. But when I add the first laborer, you see I increase 1 unit of input and there is an increase of 55 pounds in the output. And then I add one more unit of input, one more laborer, and the output increases only by 40. And with the next one, the output only increases by 30 pounds. And with the next one, the output increases by 20 pounds. So you can see that by adding extra units of the input, I can see there is an increase in the output, but that is a diminishing increase. It is diminishing by every unit. So this is very common in a lot of fields, that if you add more units of input, the output will increase, but with a decreasing rate. Eventually, there comes a point when you cannot add more units of input. For example, there are 6 workers working in this farm, and I keep adding more laborers. So when I go to 10 laborers, a lot of them would be standing free because they don't have work to do. So I will have to pay their cost, but eventually they will not be contributing to my production. The reason for that is because their marginal production will be 0 or negative for that matter. They might be playing with other laborers and eventually they might be affecting their output. So there must be some point where I need to know that this is the point where I need to stop adding up the input units, because at this point, my output gets mature, and after that, there would be negative output if I add more inputs, right? So this is the importance of marginal analysis, and this is we do through production function, right? So you can see that there is a diminishing trend in your marginal outputs. From 55 you go to 40 and then 30 and then you go to 20 and then to 10 and 5 pounds. Now these 55, 40, 30, 20, 10 and 5, they are the output of individual labors that were added into an input. Okay, so the question here is, why does the marginal product decreases with more workers? Why does this happen? What is the reason for that? Okay, so let's see. Let's think about what is happening when the marginal product of labor is decreasing. Now, it's hard to imagine a situation in which the tomatoes grow themselves. You need people to work on these things. So unless someone operates the tractor, the production of tomatoes will be equal to zero. This is the situation represented by the first row, that you have zero workers and you have zero production. But as soon as you have some laborer working in the farms, some production will happen. And because it is the very first farmer, first laborer, they will be devoting all the time to the production, and there will be 55 pounds of tomatoes, right? But when you add another one, okay, so you sometimes actually goes to specialization of work, that one person is working in one area, the other person is working in another area. So you divide the activities between people. So eventually the work, however, is divided, but at the same time the production can be reduced. It is not the overall production that get reduced. Overall production will be increasing, but with a decreasing rate, because both people will be working on different things, and eventually the overall output will have a diminishing result. Okay, so this is the overall impact that you see in the production factors when you keep adding input units. Okay, now this is a law, and this law is called the diminishing marginal returns law, the law of diminishing marginal returns, because with extra unit of inputs, you see the output increases, but with the diminishing rate. Okay, right. So now, is it possible to increase the marginal product of labor for each worker? Let's see if there is some kind of answer to that, because most of the businesses, when they hire workers, hire people to work in their departments, they always keep a marginal analysis, maybe not on paper, but in mind, that if we hire someone else, how much cost we are going to incur, and what would be the output they're going to bring in. Would that be uh, optimal? Can we enhance it? We can improve it? Those are the questions that every department and every managerial function can ask. Now, yes, there is possibility, and the possibility is that if you want to increase the productivity of those people, you have to enhance your infrastructure. You have to increase the fixed input, and that is not possible in the short run. So you can improve the productivity of extra input units, but that is not possible in the short run. That is only possible in the longer run, when you can increase the fixed input. All right, so here is a curve that you can draw, and the curve actually relates to the diminishing marginal utility, and you can see that the slope of this curve shows you that as the curve moves upward, it also have a diminishing slope. So there is a diminishing return of every marginal unit, and hence the law of diminishing marginal returns. Okay, so this is a law which is very important, because we need to find out the point where we need to produce things, where we need to actually produce the products or services that we are producing. Now we're going to point out that particular point where we should stop producing, because after that, if we keep adding the input units, the output can be negative. So what are the variable costs of producing 95 pounds of tomatoes? So we're going to ask first this question, that there's a particular quantity that we want to produce, and what could be the overall cost of producing this quantity. Now let's see. Those two columns are still there. I have the number of laborers. Also, I have the number of pounds that are being produced when we use a particular quantity of laborers, or I can say a particular quantity of input in this production process. Now there are variable cost and there are fixed cost involved here. So I will add them into the table. Now, where do these variable cost and fixed cost come from? For any business, these costs have to be calculated. For example, if you work in an office, the rent you pay monthly, it is not going to go anywhere. It will remain, it will remain at least for 1 year or couple of years, it will remain the same. So it can be considered a fixed cost. Your electricity bill for a services concern can be considered a relatively fixed cost, because almost similar kind of bills are received over the years. So there are a lot of things that you can consider fixed in a certain process. The reason for that is because they are not going to change, or they are not going to be altered by production or increase or decrease in production. But there are also variable costs, the number of people working in that particular department and their salaries, that they can vary if there is a commission kind of ratio is involved. But if those salaries are given per month in that fixed form, salaries form, then that is also a fixed cost. Okay, so the amount of input like papers and supplies are used, how many cases were done, how many projects were done, those could be the variable cost that can be considered in services concerns. In the production, you can see the simply long-term assets can be considered at the fixed cost, and the variable cost could be of those short-term assets that were consumed during the production process. So from there, you can gather this data. So we have a theoretical data, supposed data here, where a variable cost is there and the fixed cost is there. So total cost is equal to the addition of variable cost and the fixed cost. So when we add the variable and the fixed cost, both become the total cost of production. So now I have 6 levels or 7 levels, 0 to 6. I have 7 levels of production. And for each level of production, I know my fixed cost, variable cost, and total cost. Okay, so we have reached to this point. Now I will draw some curves because a picture speaks 1,000 words. So I need to put all of this information in the form of a picture. So first of all, I'm drawing a curve that shows my total cost. What is the total cost that is being incurred while I produce this level of production? So on the x-axis, I have the amount of those tomatoes in pounds. And on the y-axis, I have the cost. Because cost is a dependent variable, that is why we put it on the y-axis. It is dependent upon the quantity that we want to produce. So this curve needed to be kept in mind. And then we have another curve. Now that curve is of the total production, and that is the marginal product curve that we just saw in the previous section where we saw the production function. Now, if we combine these two with each other, you can see they are both mirror images of each other. They are both the same curves, but inverse to each other, right? Now, this is very interesting. So you have two different points where they are intersecting each other. There is a lower point and there is a higher point. And these two curves can give us a lot of information about the production function, that we can stop the function on a very lower end where we don't have much profit, much revenue, all there is the cost. And on the higher end, we have more production, less cost. Okay, so let's see. Now this is a table where I also have added the marginal cost, not only the total cost, but the marginal cost. So whenever the word marginal comes with a variable in economics, you need to know that there is 1 unit increase in some input. And because of that 1 unit increase, we are going to see an increase in this particular component. So here we are looking at cost, total cost. With every 1 unit increase in the input, what is the impact on total cost? So if I look at this graph and this table, I can see that when there is 0 laborer, I have $75 of cost, because that $75 cost is fixed cost. Even if there is no production, no variable cost, there will be some fixed cost because I have to run my business. I have to keep that office with me. I have to pay the rent, even if I don't go there, even if I don't have people to work in there. So even then I have to pay that rent. So fixed cost is fixed, that is there. But when you add first unit of input, you have some production, you have some variable cost, because for production, for processes to produce services or goods, you need to have some kind of input, and that input would cost you something. Now, when you have people working for you, eventually the cost goes to 139. So when you have 55 pounds in production and your cost actually increases by $64, you can you can divide $64 by 55. That is the amount of production. So 64 divided by 55 is equal to 1.16. And again, 128 divided by 95 is equal to 1.60. So now I can see that with addition in input, there is some addition in the cost, overall cost, total cost. There is an increase in the output, but also in the total cost. and both have their marginal mirror curves, right? So just look at the marginal cost now. We have 1.16, 1.6, 2.13, 3.20, 6.4, and 12.80. Can you see the trend? It is kind of doubling up. It is increasing with increase in the units of input. So input units are costing me, and they are costing with an increasing rate. My product, my overall product is increasing, the production is increasing, but with a diminishing rate. But the costs are increasing, but with an upward rate. So there is an acceleration in the cost, but there is a diminishing trend in the production. So I would like to see that second point. Let me go back to the curve. When I join these two curves, this is the upper point where these two intersect with each other. And this is the point where I need to put my production. Okay, so remember this. Now, what is the bottom line that we need to get here? That total cost include fixed costs and the variable cost. Then we need to calculate the marginal cost also. Why we need to calculate the marginal cost? We need to do it for every business concern, whether it is a goods production or whether it is producing services, we need to calculate it. Marginal costs are directly related with the marginal product of the input variable. Okay, marginal cost eventually increase with more input. It has an increasing format. Now, there is also a law for this, which is increasing opportunity cost. Okay, so we have input that uh, gets increased, and with that, the overall cost and the marginal cost increases. Now we are going to see the final thing about this production function, and we will explain that how any concern, any business, even if you if you start a small restaurant or you start a small shop of anything, you can calculate all these things and you can come up with that level where you need to work, where you need to stay. And beneath that level or beyond that level, you will be facing a lot of many costs that are not necessarily needed to be there. So now I'm going to expand the table by adding average cost. How can we convert the variable cost into average variable cost? You need to divide the variable cost just by the quantity of output. Same with the fixed cost, you divide that with the quantity of output, and same with total cost, you divide that also with the quantity of output. So at zero, you can see there is no quantity. So when you divide the average variable cost by zero or the fixed cost by zero, there is no change in the cost. But when we have 55 pounds of tomatoes produced with 1 unit of input, you can divide every cost by 55. And on the second level, you can divide every cost with 95, then 125, 145, and so on. So you will have all these costs in front of you. Again, the marginal cost remains the same. Okay, let me see how we actually come up with the curves, different curves. Now, why does the average fixed cost curve always decrease with more input? What does that mean? Where is the average fixed cost? The third last column is the average fixed cost. And now that has a decrease. That is decreasing with every unit of input. You can see that from the numbers 1.36, 0.79, and 0.60, 0.52, and 0.48, 0.47. Why fixed cost is decreasing? There is simple reason beyond that, because production is increasing. When you add more units to input, your overall production goes up. Let me translate this into something you can be familiar with. Like when nobody works in an office, right? No production is there, no output is there, but you have to pay the rent for the office, which is like 1,50,000 rupees. So 1,50,000 rupees, you pay that money for no output. Then somebody comes in the office and starts working. Now you have output. And now that $150,000 can be divided by that output. So more the output, the fixed cost divided into multiple units. So as many units of output you have, as less the fixed cost you will find out. So with increasing output, the fixed cost actually gets distributed to every increasing number of units in the production. That's why we have a downward decreasing trend in the average fixed cost. Okay, so let's see, why does the average fixed cost curve always decrease with more output? I told you, I explained it to you. As more units of output gets produced, the spread of fixed costs actually is distributed to more output units. So this would be the shape of average fixed cost. Now, when we add the variable cost curve into it, let me add it to the graph so we can see that what is the behavior of average variable cost. We saw the behavior of average fixed cost. It get decreased with more input, but when we talk about average variable cost, it increases with increase in output, but initially not on that much accelerating rate. When it goes to a particular point where we have more marginal cost, at that point you see a bigger increase in the average variable cost. So finally we see that the average total cost curve. Now, average total cost curve has two components in it. It has the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. Both are added into it. So you see a combination of average fixed and average variable cost in the average total cost curve. This is a very important curve because we're going to combine this curve with the marginal cost curve. So when we look at the marginal cost curve, we have initially drawn this from the data, from the table, and you can see where we plotted the different dots from the table, and eventually this shape comes to you where the marginal cost initially is very low, and eventually with more variable input, it keeps increases. Now you can see that all the curves are plotted on a same graph. Now, this is overwhelming, a lot of data. What should I do with this? You can collect this data for any business, for any concern, for any department for that matter. But what you're going to do with this, you're going to find out a point where your marginal cost curve is intersecting with average total cost. Okay, I'm going to repeat, your marginal cost is intersecting your average total cost. And if you look at that point, there is a green dot, and you can drop that dot to almost 100 units of your quantity on the x-axis. And on the y-axis, it is almost between 2.00 and $2.50. So almost $2.25 per unit cost is borne by this particular concern, and they are producing around 100 units of pounds of tomatoes. Now, this is an optimal level for this concern. How we came to this point? We came to this point because this is a point where your average total cost, remember this, your average total cost is on the lowest point, because marginal cost curve always intersect with average total cost curve on the lowest point of the average total cost curve. So that is a point where we need to produce our products, because at that point, our average total cost is the lowest. So if we have lowest cost, whatever we are producing will have more profit margin. Our revenue will be maximized. So this is the optimal level where we need to produce the products. Okay, so the bottom line is the average fixed cost curves decrease with more inputs. The average variable cost curve, average total cost, and marginal cost curves will eventually increase with more output due to diminishing marginal returns. Now, the marginal cost curve crosses the average total cost curve at its lowest point, and that is the level, that is the point where you need to produce the products. If you are producing less than that, that means you are bearing more cost. You have to pay your labor, you have to pay for the inputs that you're installing into production process. They're costing you a lot. So you are not working at the optimal level. You're not working with the lowest cost. But if you're working beyond this, even then you're paying more cost, because your marginal cost will be more. Extra units of input are there that are not producing enough input that is required for the production process. Okay, so with that, I would end this lecture. Go and review that what is the production process, what are the inputs, what is the production function, what are the variable and fixed factors in the production function, what are the laws of diminishing marginal returns, okay, how we actually come up with the productivity curve, and then what are different costs like variable cost, fixed cost, marginal cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost. Now, what is the behavior of all these costs and where the marginal cost actually intersects with the average total cost? And that is the optimal point of production. So, what could be the optimal point of production? Now, see, all of this analysis could also be done on an Excel file. All you need to know is that data which is there for a business. Like for a telecommunication company, what could be the fixed cost? What could be the variable cost? What could be the output units? Now you create that data, you produce those curves, and you come to that particular point where you see that these are the number of customers that we need to serve. If we have less than that, we are not being operating on the optimal level. If we have more than these customers, then well, we can let go of a few customers because they might not be adding up that much output to our revenue. All right. So thank you very much for this. Hopefully see you in the next session. Take care.